What's going on, people? Mackenzie back again, back to the topics. Thank you all for listening. And I am joined again with the lovely Mila. How are you doing today?
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thank you.
Great. I'm excited.
You excited for this week?
I am.
All right. So this was actually your topic. So um, really interesting to get into. Today we're going to be talking about what the heck is going on in Colombia right now. So they've been in the news recently for one of their ports, but to kind of understand how it got to what it is right now, we're going to give kind of a little exposition about the history of Colombia. So basically, Colombia is a banana republic. That's how it started. A banana republic. Uh, it was it was owned by private corporations based in America, but the workers were farmers in Colombia. They were forced to grow monoculture crops, which were the bananas. So essentially, that left them to depend on the corporation for everything, basically food, shelter, this and that. And at a certain point, they just essentially said, we're not doing this anymore. We're going on strike. So they stopped working. The United Fruit Company essentially tried their best to thwart it. They couldn't. The labor movement it grew locally in numbers. The thing about that was that because it was an American-based company, the United States, as a government, told Colombia, if you don't get your strikers in order for messing up our bottom line, we're going to send in the military. And this was in the 1920s. They threatened to send in the Marines in the 20s to take care of this banana republic. Um, Colombia, they tried to go in and, simmer the situation down a little bit, but they're protesters. They're fighting for literally just kind of like incremental wins. They're not even fighting for anything significant. I think one of them was like 6-hour work days, a minimum wage, because what they were being
Mhm.
paid was essentially coupons. They were being paid coupons that were only good at the United Fruit Company for like those type of products. So they were just asking for a little bit of humanity, and they didn't give in like they shouldn't have. And basically, the Colombian government just opened fire on the protesters, and that is historically called the Banana Massacre. So fast forward 20 years, we've got movements growing, we've got organizations coming together, coalescing, and you've got like a real push for you know uh, sincere democracy. You've got labor movements, you've got left movements, socialists, communists, anarchists, all you can think of, and they're like really just fighting for the working person. And 20 years later, in 1948, another flashpoint happens where one of the socialist candidates, his name was Jorge Gaitan, he was assassinated. And apparently he was a very popular candidate amongst the people, because once the country at large basically got word of this situation, um, it it basically resulted in a civil war called La Valencia. Civil war lasting about a decade, and this is in the 40s, I believe. So um, country really hasn't been stable, at all in its entire history. And we fast forward to today, and well, we don't fast forward. I just want to say that it's kind of everything kind of fractured into a lot of factions. You've got the government, which is not as nearly of a stronghold as it is in the United States. You've got paramilitary forces, which kind of act independent, but also are funded by the government. You've got left rebels. You've got, drug cartel, or not, the cartel, but you've got, drug smugglers trying to make their money. So you've got all these different forces, and then you've got, the people in the middle. So it's been like that for decades. And now we fast forward to the current point that we're at. Okay.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point of like we fast forward over a lot of history, but we have to because history is infinite and we have like an hour ish. So
Mm.
like we gotta fast forward. But yeah, so what's happening right now in the Colombian port city of Buenaventura, it's on the Pacific coast and it is responsible for 60% of Colombia's total trade and yeah, Colombia's total trade. It's responsible for
Oh, yeah.
60%, but
International
the
trade.
people who yeah, international trade. The people who live there though, the people who live in Buenaventura, they are like they're living in poverty and it's not just like they're living in poverty, it's like an enormous amount, a high percentage of people are living in poverty. They're not seeing any revenue from the port, even though their city is what creates like 60% of Colombia's international trade. The infrastructure to get the goods from the port to like Bogota, Medellin, Cali, Cartagena, all the other Colombian cities are actually very strong, but it's not like, again, it's not taking care of the people. And back in 1993, there was a human rights commission with the UN. It basically kind of like fleshed out the details, but made it to where Afro-Colombian communities and indigenous Colombian communities can share collective ownership of their land to preserve cultural identity. And it basically guarantees Afro-Colombian communities and indigenous Colombian communities to develop economically, socially, and according to like their own autonomous cultural elements on their ancestral lands. Well, the port of Buenaventura is an ancestral land for Afro-Colombians, especially. I want to say over 80% of the people in Buenaventura are Afro-Colombian. It was a large fisherman's port, and that is like a trade that Afro-Colombians were traditionally in. They're seeing a lot of things like ruined with climate change. We will get to that later. moving on, not moving on, moving forward, identifying more issues with this in 2017. Or basically, so that was created in 1993. The right for these communities to profit off of their ancestral lands and to basically own their ancestral lands, and have rights as Afro-Indigenous or Afro-Colombian and Indigenous Colombians. Now we can like fast forward through so much to 2017 when they went on strike, and it was a large strike. It was over 400,000 people showed up to strike in Buenaventura about the government not upholding their promises. Armed groups had continued to move into the city and were basically holding the locals. I don't want to say hostage, but hostage is a good word for me here. I might find a better word later to
Right. Yeah.
but basically holding the town hostage, and the government wasn't doing anything. They're still getting their trade that they need out of the port, and they're kind of leaving the citizens of Buenaventura, or the locals of Buenaventura, to fend for themselves against armed groups that are moving in. And a lot of people are pointing to the fact that this violates that right that Afro-Colombians and indigenous Colombians have
Right.
in the
Right. Yeah. So basically, the civilians are being held at ransom.
Yeah, and that was 2017. Now things have only gotten progressively worse. Last year in 2020, there was another protest to call attention to the fact that they weren't getting like the care that they needed for COVID. Things were only getting exacerbated in the town because of COVID, and like armed forces were able to take more advantage of people there. Murders, and then since 2020, we've entered 2021, murders have increased. Like by 200%. There's it we're I don't want to say we're hitting a breaking point because we hit a breaking point 4 years ago, but this is another breaking point.
Right. Yeah. And it's really discouraging to think of the things that need to be done and are failing to be done, basically, uh, because Colombia is in such dire need of help. I'm talking from the, the civilian perspective,
Mhm.
and it just doesn't seem like the police or the government military are willing to do anything about it. And organizers, well, not protesters, but actual people that build, coalitions and
Mhm.
movements. Essentially, those people are being discouraged. Actual like leaders on the ground are being discouraged because you have those armed forces
Mhm.
that are in the area smuggling drugs, doing this and that, and basically intimidating the civilians. Would you say they're torturing people and leaving them for dead where the whole city
Yeah,
can hear them in the middle
torturing
of the
people.
night?
I think it was referred to as saw houses. Basically, you can hear the person's screams the entire night while they're being tortured, and it is a tactic to silence local activist leaders, and I mean murder, extortion.
Yeah,
Of course.
there's human limbs that wash up upon shore. That could be extremely disheartening to start any kind of movement. It's really bleak of a situation to see Colombia in that situation with just no assistance.
Especially exactly. It's extremely discouraging when your government won't step up to help you because they're getting what they want out of the deal, and
Right.
it's this mentality of like, oh, they'll be fine, we'll just get what we need out of it, we're getting what we need, why do we need to pay attention to that? It's unfortunately it has been historically happening in Colombia, especially among Afro-Colombian communities, especially among like indigenous Colombian communities. um
But Buenaventura has a high um, Afro and indigenous population.
yes, and
So,
especially Afro-Colombian population.
and so you talk about how Buenaventura is this kind of paradoxical city in that it provides over 50% of the goods, because the port is there, but there's 500,000 citizens. I don't know how many people are in the city, but there's almost 500,000 in poverty, like in, just abject poverty. And there's just nothing being done about it by the government. It does seem kind of like this is being I wouldn't necessarily say orchestrated, but this is being allowed to happen. And what I want to ask is, do you think they're actually targeting these people because of their ethnicity, or is it just kind of like a class situation? Because
I
they
think
do that in America with the pick your bootstraps up, and there's this agreement being had, but at the same time, they're being strong armed. They're having their money, for a lack of a better term, basically like deboed from them, and the government isn't standing aside and giving the money back to them, essentially.
right, and I think, and that is a lot of the problem is, there was an agreement that economically, socially, like funds would be redirected back to these communities because these communities are providing for the whole country, and that's just not happening. And you can like they're still building and investing in these really wealthy neighborhoods in Bogota, and in really wealthy neighborhoods in like the capital of the country, but they're not doing that in the places that need it. And we see this around the world, but we definitely want to call it out where we see it. Like we
Exactly.
can see this in the US, we can see this in Myanmar, we can see this everywhere, but we still have to call it out when we see it. It's still a
Right.
problem.
Exactly. And where it gets into really murky waters is whenever you talk about the government and how there's no responsibility being, or no accountability being taken from the government. What you see is just kind of blaming the other side. You see the rebels on the left blaming the paramilitary on the right, and vice versa. There's no connection whatsoever. It's just a constant blame game, and it it becomes telling whenever you actually look into the aid that's being had, and we talked about this, the United States was historically, very involved in the government of Colombia and the country as a whole. Like I talked about at the beginning
Hmm.
with the Banana Republic.
Hmm.
So as of 2004, Colombia was a top three recipient of aid from the United States behind Egypt and Syria or Saudi Arabia. So
Hmm.
whenever you have the United States, I think we've given them about $3 billion in total, and 75% of it has gone to the defense. And then whenever you have the paramilitary forces going against the left rebels, and there's just kind of there's no order being had. Is That's kind of what I'm trying to get at with all of
Yeah.
this. This is really wordy point of saying that the government's, for lack of a better word, just allowing all of this to happen.
Yeah, and I think it is also important. I just remembered, like, Venezuela was posing a threat to Colombia whenever they were starting to also not like feed their people, and and we were seeing a lot of human rights violations, and there was a lot of um violence happening on the Colombia Venezuela border
Right.
around that time. But I think it's still important that, like, those don't get used on Colombia's own people. Like, if
Yeah.
75% of the of our aid was to, like, arms, I think it's so important that they don't use those on their own citizens. um, and I remember that being a problem on their other port, Barranquilla.
I think that
Uh,
was the point, though. I think that's the point of the aid. Like, not to be cynical, but yeah, can you can go on? I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah, no, for sure. And that's exactly what I was about to say. Is like when they got that aid, there was a lot more human rights violations done to their own people on the port of Barranquilla, which again is a similar port. It's just on the Atlantic side of
Right.
Colombia. Um, Same demographics, even really when we're talking about it, and they were seeing a lot more. Like they were seeing a lot more like military style policing in their area after that. I just it's something common. And you asked earlier if it was a class thing. It's 100% a class thing. Yes, unfortunately, all of the countries in America are all of the countries in the continents of the Americas are tied up in this whole thing called like a post-slavery um government, and a post-slavery like history.
Right.
And because of like almost every single country in the Americas has like systematically held Black and Indigenous people in the lower classes of their society. So yeah, it's 100% a class thing, but you can't ignore
Absolutely.
the race
Yeah,
in it.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
you can't ignore the race in it. It's
Yeah.
one of those things.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, uh, you know, doing the researching that we did for this conversation, um, it kind of seems like, well, even though Colombia is not as powerful of a country as the United States, and their their country is not very stable at all, it's really it's interesting to see the type of concessions that they do get, and it's interesting to see the type of things that like the working class and the citizens have fought for, such
Mm-hmm.
as such as the port and being able to profit off of the port. And in principle, they won that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not working out in practice at the moment, but they're
Yeah,
they're
if the government would have held up
right,
their side of the deal, like that would be
right, but they're entitled
basically
to it.
they. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really encouraging sign if you look at it in the American perspective. If you look at what can be the equivalent of a port, I mean, besides, the ports that we do have in America, there's been similar conversations. It didn't get nearly as far as they did in Buenaventura, but let's talk about, the natural gas in America and how
Mm-hmm.
much they extract in America, on the land that everybody lives on, and these
Mm-hmm.
oil companies make so much money. There were conversations about, hey, if you're mining oil in this area, the people that live in that city should, get a profit of some of that because you're making. such ridiculous amounts of money, you know, on
Hmm.
your own. So from that perspective, Colombia, we can learn a lot from them
Oh
because
yeah.
they they've they've won the right in Buenaventura to take a cut from anything coming through that port, and we should
Yeah,
feel
from
the same way about oil. If we're gonna keep bringing it out, you know, then we should all be entitled to. I think they do that in Alaska. Maybe I think that's actually a thing in Alaska, if I'm not mistaken.
it is a thing. It's like I'm not an Alaskan citizen, so I don't really know, but I know that it doesn't necessarily go to the indigenous communities, but it does go to the people who live in Alaska.
Yeah, yeah, there you go. Yeah, but
Which is, but I mean, you're totally right. Thinking about that from a US perspective, you're like, what? They did what? That's amazing. If they can follow through on that, that is amazing, because we see environmental disasters all the time in the US, and it is specifically in those communities that are taken advantage of and just having all of their resources pumped out from underneath them.
right.
What I was going to say is also in Colombia, in Buenaventura, there is I got at it a little bit earlier. Um, a traditional like industry on the port is a fisherman's industry, and because of climate change, they're seeing a lot of the fish have gone away. They're seeing a lot of like decrease in their ability to support themselves on the port outside of like participating in international trade through that port.
Right.
And um, that's a really big problem. We're starting to see a lot more people speak up about that. But especially, you know, that's just kind of to add to it of like the port and like the domestic or the international trade that comes through it to Colombia is a really big like again 60%, and it shouldn't like it's not the only industry there though, but all the other industries there are suffering because of climate change and these armed groups and land grabbing, illegal land grabbing.
Hmm.
And I just think that I think that that's really important to also point out is like it's not just the trade, but that's the reason that we see a lot of silence.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Yeah, I 100% agree with you on that. And I just have really one more thing to add to this is basically you start to see how these things kind of link, and you can relate them back to your own life and your own
Mhm.
communities. And they are really encouraging in terms of building movements in your area because whenever we talked about what's going on in Colombia and that there's these people that are entitled to this, to, you know, whatever comes through the port, and that's their right from the
Mhm.
government. Similarly, we talked about what's going on in India. The
Mhm.
farmers in India, they have a right from the government to collect from their yield, whether it's good or not, from that season. But what's going on in India, why the farmers are protesting, is because the government wants to relinquish their duties and, you know, open up private sectors and basically starve the farmers off, kind of how the Banana Republic went. I can
Mhm.
definitely see that becoming monoculture and the farmers having to, you know, pay off their or sell off their land in order to pay off debts and
Yeah, or
you
just like
know, so
monopolization.
exactly. So
Mhm.
you know, the the biggest thing to take away from all these stories is just to see the link and how that relates to you. And whenever we talk about coalition building, it doesn't necessarily have to be people, you know, in your immediate space, your state or your country. It's a worldwide coalition because there's people in different parts of the world that are living just like we are.
Mhm.
We're at the bottom of our economy, lower middle class or lower class, poor, working class, what have you. And you hear people, they like to say, oh, America, poor people in America are basically like the richest 10% of the rest of the world or something like that. And I mean, I guess if this was like a global thing, but this is America and that's
Mhm.
that country. So yeah,
I think a lot of people forget that a lot of poor people have their houses here on credit. So, and their apartments on credit.
They don't
If
even
you
own
lose
it.
that
Yeah,
income, you're homeless. That is like a
exactly.
reality. You're homeless, and
Exactly.
then you're barred from getting an apartment and barred from getting a house
That
until
is
you
a
can
really good
produce
point.
extra funds to say that you're a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
It is,
Because people in
um,
the third world countries, or what we deem to be third world or developing, they may have huts or, small homes, but if they're not working, they can still retreat to a shelter. If you lose your job in this country, you lose your health insurance, you lose your housing, you're just basically asked out. There's
mhm. And
no
you lose the ability to like get hot food
yeah,
because you can't get hot food on food
or
stamps.
readily available. Yeah. Unless
Mhm.
you go to like a soup kitchen. But yeah.
Oh yeah. I was like, no, I tried at 7-Eleven. They threw my shit away. They were like, it's hot,
Yeah.
threw it away. I was like, you're gonna throw it away?
Wow.
I,
Disrespectful. They said it's hot. Can't be
yeah.
doing
They were like,
it.
it's hot. No, grab the cold one. Go microwave it at home.
Oh,
I was like, I
yikes.
don't have one right now. It's far away. Shit.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
Uh,
Uh,
anyway,
yeah.
that's a side tangent. Just because I think a lot of people forget. I think a
It's
lot of
hard
people
out
forget.
here.
Sometimes I will say I'm a very lucky person, but very privileged person, but
Yeah.
yeah, it
I
can
do
be.
wanna end it on, unless you have anything else to say.
No, that was my last tie was just saying, this is a this is it's not just the port. There's so many industries being affected by climate change, land grabbing, and um, armed forces, and just pure neglect.
I agree. 100% agree. So, just want to end it on a really interesting piece of information. So the county judge in Houston, Texas, is a Colombian actually.
Oh, okay.
Her name is Lena Hidalgo. She is the first woman and Latina to hold the position. I believe
Okay.
it's just in this county. It didn't really specify, but yeah, she's the first woman and Latina to hold the position. And her birthday was this past Friday. Do you want to
Oh,
guess how old she is or how old she turned?
32.
30.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I'll only let her know happy birthday.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think that's really cool. 30
That is
years
really neat.
old, born in Colombia, immigrated here when she was 15. I believe she went to college at Stanford. She wanted to continue her education and actually I think she wanted to be like a judge, but after the 2016 election, she was, I guess, compelled to run for public office. So
I
she
can
is,
see that.
yeah, she is the county judge for Houston. Yeah, at
Wow, that's
27 years
awesome.
old, I think she became county judge at 27.
Oh, that's how old I am now.
Yeah, she's
That's
30.
awesome. That's
So
really cool.
that is really cool. Yeah, and she's actually been doing a really diligent job in the city, especially over the past week because the whole state was without power and water
Hmm. Hmm.
for a little stretch, and come to find out, the people of Houston were wanting answers. We were looking at our mayor, our county judge. They wanted answers. Come to find out, it had nothing to do with anybody except the governor. The governor and that bogus deal that he made with whatever that organization, Centerpoint and whoever. But yeah, that the whole grid situation was trash, and she handled it very, very amazingly. She was on the people's side the whole time. She has family members in Houston that were without, the whole state was without power, to be perfectly honest with you. You see Ted Cruz go out the damn country. So
Hmm.
yeah, Cancun Cruz.
Cancun cruise. Uh,
uh, yeah, I just want to say happy birthday to Miss Hidalgo, and
yeah. Happy birthday, Miss
that
Hidalgo. I'll only let
lines
her
up pretty
know.
nicely with the Colombian topic we were talking
Oh
about.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So we are going to keep it going on YouTube for the podcast. we're gonna end it here. And for the YouTube, we just want to show a quick video for you guys. It doesn't really translate well to podcast, so that's why we're gonna end that segment where it is and just keep it going for YouTube. So those of you that are staying with us, I just want to play this quick video for you guys, and it's staying on topic with the theme of the episode. So let's get on into it. All right.
Estamos a 7 años de poder hacer los mayores esfuerzos para revertir el cambio climático. Estamos en la década más decisiva para la historia de la humanidad. Lo que me motivó a fundar Guardianes por la Vida fue el ver la realidad que estaba viviendo el planeta. La coyuntura que estaba viviendo no solo América Latina, sino también en todo el mundo, de la cual ningún país, ningún territorio no es excluido del cambio climático. Pues en sí el cambio climático no tiene fronteras en nuestro planeta, entonces era algo preocupante. Hola a todos. Y también, digamos, la poca relevancia que se le está dando al tema climático y principalmente desde los gobiernos. Sí podríamos vivir el fin de la humanidad y de muchas especies en este momento. Este sí es un momento preocupante. Los gobiernos están tomando las decisiones, pero realmente es que en un futuro también no son los que van a tomar las riendas de esa sociedad que nos dejaron esos gobiernos, sino que va a ser la juventud, porque la juventud y la niñez no solo es el futuro, sino que también es el presente. No solo reconoce un esfuerzo mío, sino también un esfuerzo de muchos niños de Colombia que trabajan por ese tema ambiental. Es una carta que también a uno le genera satisfacción, una inspiración para el poder seguir adelante en ese esfuerzo y trabajo ambiental que uno adelanta. Puede ser el arte, la física, la ciencia, pueden defender el ambiente y la vida, que realmente uno lo hace por amor a la naturaleza y al ambiente.
Oh,
Awesome.
it always does that. Oh my god.
Oh, that's that
Commercial, yeah. Not paying for that.
Man.
But yeah, that was a good note to end it on, I felt. Francisco Vera, 11-year-old environmentalist, also from Colombia, which shows that there's bright lights all around the world. And despite what's going on in Colombia, you know, they still got people that want to fight for not just people in Colombia, but you know, the whole world.
My favorite part is when he says, "Listen to the children." That's like, we've been saying it, we don't practice it.
Yeah.
Kids care. The kids care, and they're blatantly honest. Ask a 5-year-old if you're fat.
They'll let you know.
They'll let you know.
Yeah. And for him,
and they'll give you reasons why they think so too.
Hey.
They'll break it down. They'll break it down.
Exactly. Yeah, they're just trying to help.
They're just trying. Exactly. That's listen to the kids. They're honest, and you know what? He's right. They're gonna be here in 50 years.
Yeah. It's their world now.
Mm-hmm.
For him to be receiving death threats, that's so crazy. But he doesn't really seem bothered by it. Not bothered, but he doesn't seem phased.
Well, you can tell his sights are on something so much bigger. His response was, he mentions like, I'm more worried about the climate than my death threats. Thanks though.
Yeah. Yeah, but I just it's just crazy, isn't it? You know, like all the stuff we just talked about was wild, but like you sending death threats to like kids out there too. Like Colombia is rough and rugged. I'll tell you. I'll tell you that right now. That's crazy. But I just want to say shout out to Francisco for just, being out there just so powerfully, and making an impact at 11 years old. Can you remember what I was doing at 11 years old? I was like, really, it's like fifth grade, wasn't it? Yo,
That's a long time ago.
yeah,
All right.
yeah. Shout out to him. So
Shout out.
I
All
think
right.
we're gonna leave it there. And as always, thanks for being here to have the combos with me.
Thank you
And
for letting me join in. I like it.
yeah, 100%. We'll be back next week, and thank you all for listening. Peace out.